Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, December 10th, 2025. Dr. Gilbert Doctorow joins us from Brussels. Dr. Doctorow, a pleasure. My dear friend, thank you for accommodating my schedule as always, and welcome here. I want to go back a little bit in history before we get to your views on Donald Trump and realism. Views logically deduced from the national security strategy document that he authorized to be released earlier this week. Why did the Ukrainian government bomb its own people in the years preceding the SMO in eastern Ukraine?
Because the people whom they were bombing were largely Russian speakers who rejected the coup d'etat, which brought the people in Kiev to power. So it was the start of essentially a civil war. And in a civil war, you do things like you bomb your own citizens.
The coup d'etat in 2014 that threw out, I forget the name of the president that was Yanukovych, right, who now lives in Moscow, or at least fled to Russia, is the one celebrated by Lindsey Graham, John McCain, Victoria Nuland, and Hillary Clinton as part of the neocon plan to westernize Ukraine, and arguably led to the special military operation.
I agree completely.
Do we know if MI6 or CIA were involved, or would it be absurd to conclude that they weren't?
The second. Surely they were involved. They were involved.
I mean, it's what they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. That as a background, does the State Department, as it is currently constituted under Marco Rubio, does Marco Rubio himself understand or accept these views of the origins of the war that you and I and most people watching us now and guests on this show do?
We can assume he does not accept what we on the show and the audience understand. But let's not be too cruel to Rubio. He is a neocon who's been put in charge of a neocon organization.
Right.
And there's a reason why the State Department has been sidelined by Donald Trump. He had enough experience with the State Department's backstabbing him from the start of his first mandate in power. These people, you don't come in from the street and become an officer in the State Department. You come up to the ranks. And when you go back to where the people who are now holding important positions in the State Department came in, they came in at the turn of this new millennium when Dick Cheney was busy purging the State Department, purging the intel organizations of anyone who disagreed with them in their neocon ideology, and was very busy replacing these people whom were fired with outsourced intelligence, which was purchased commercially using public sources for information. So the State Department as a whole has been a big obstacle to Mr. Trump's attempt to turn around American foreign policy.
I could not agree with you more, and one wonders why Trump felt compelled to please Mrs. Adelson, who wanted Marco Rubio to be Trump's vice president, by saying no, but I'll make him Secretary of State. I know Marco Rubio. I don't agree with him on many things, but I feel sorry for him. I can imagine him saying to Trump, I'm going to Russia next week to meet with Putin, and Trump saying, no, you're not. I'm sending 2 real estate agents, Witkoff and Jared. Okay, then I'm going to Geneva to meet with the NATO foreign ministers. No, you're not. I'm sending the Secretary of the Army, or Tom Barrett, another real estate developer, this one from Long Island, but a buddy of mine that I can trust. I wonder how much longer Rubio will last in that office. He's not really accomplishing anything. And from the Russian perspective, which is where you have a unique and almost jeweler's eye ability to discern what they're thinking, He's not the de facto Secretary of State, is he?
Well, when there is an actual negotiation, when whoever is in charge of Ukraine sits down to whoever Mr. Putin designates as his representative, I assume that Rubio will be there, because without Rubio there, it's hard to place Lavrov there, and Lavrov should be there. So I think he will be there. The main thing, Rubio has nowhere to go. So he's in a really tough spot. He certainly doesn't enjoy his job. He certainly doesn't enjoy the direction of foreign policy that Trump is imposing on him. But if he walks out in the street, that he has given up a very good job for space on the street.
Right, right. And for that very good job, he gave up a seat in the Senate he probably could have held for the rest of his working life.
Exactly. So he's uniquely handicapped. And not like people like Rex Tillerson, who was Trump's first Secretary of State, who was retired essentially. So he didn't have anything to lose by taking that job. But Rubio had a lot to lose.
I wonder what, and maybe you can give us some insight here, the Russians think of Witkoff and Kushner, not as human beings, but as sophisticated negotiators. I mean, I don't think it's an understatement to say that Sergei Lavrov has forgotten more than these two know about international diplomacy and Russian history.
Well, there is a certain parallelism here. Well, again, not to be unkind to Lavrov and not to overdo the role of these two, Witkoff and Jared Kushner, but the similarity is that they are both implementing policies made by others. The other is on the one hand Trump, and on the side Putin. So in that sense, what the difference is, the lack of professional preparation for diplomacy. But on that point, from my own personal experience, I'd like to raise an issue that no one else will on this show or most other shows, because there are very few businessmen who appear on these shows. And while I don't consider myself professionally prepared to be a businessman, in fact, I spent 25 years of my life doing just that. Not businessman, but executive in a large corporation. And in that position, you have to understand that the basic task of the CEO, or in my own case, a fill-in for the CIO as a country manager, is diplomacy. That's what you're doing. I had accountants who looked after the finances. I had marketing people who looked after the marketing plan. And I was supposed to look after diplomacy.
Understood. I want to read for you, we'll put it up as a full screen, the opening paragraph from the lead story in today's Washington Post, and ask you to comment on it. A new U.S. national security strategy berating Europe has triggered a wave of acrimony across the Atlantic, enraging and dismaying European officials who say the document has turned the Trump administration's vitriol against European democracies into a formal policy. Agree, disagree, or somewhere in between?
I've been living here for 45 years. Since 2017, I am a dual national, a citizen also of Belgium. And you have a different perspective on these things from when you travel through, or even if you spend a few months here. The fact is that everything that Trump said regarding the lack of democracy here is perfectly true. And I am just a half an hour's walk from the European institutions for at least 6 years, when I had a very kind member of parliament who invited me into conferences there in the EU Parliament building, run by various party factions. I saw the European Parliament from the inside, and it is rotten. People who just pass through or look at it from a distance think, oh, the problem with Europe is just bureaucratic. I hear this every day. It's run by a bureaucracy. Untrue. It's run by people who are politicians, essentially, and not career bureaucrats. Von der Leyen is not a career bureaucrat. She is not a functionary. She's not a non-entity. She is a dictator, a usurper of power, but that's a separate issue. She is elected by indirect representation. Well, where do you have direct representation in this world? In one place only, as far as I know, it's Switzerland. Other countries, including the United States, do not have direct representation. After all, I mean, formally speaking, our president is not elected by you or me. He's elected by the Electoral College. So
Right.
these things are, they have to be fine-tuned and looked at in depth without broad generalizations. And the fact of the matter is that the European institutions are a top-down democracy, not a bottom-up democracy. The people who are the candidates, or who are the deputies in that parliament and who elect someone like von der Leyen, they are not responsible to the voters in the country from which they come. They're responsible to the party bosses, of whom
Right.
there are very few. And that means that they're having been elected relieve them of any responsibility to do anything the public wants, and they don't. The leverage system has to be explained. A vote in Germany counts for 5 times more than my vote here in Belgium. Why do I say that? Because Germany, with 85 million population or something like that, controls 450 million Europeans. Since it controls, it's the most important constituent element in the European People's Party, which is a centrist right party, that has systematically, for the last 25 years, really been a dominant voice and controlled who is who in the European Commission.
Right. Let me ask you a few questions about Germany. Chancellor Scholz's approval rating is in the low 20s. Is he long for that job, or is the AfD, one of those right-wing groups, going to put together a coalition and oust him?
Considering the cordon sanitaire around the AfD, it's improbable they can put together a coalition anytime soon. Yes, they are more popular, but let's look at it seriously. They don't have 50% popularity. They have, I don't know, 18, 25%. So they could be a dominant force in a coalition. But first, they have to have partners willing to deal with them, which at present they don't. Not at the federal level, anyway. Even if in 1 or 2 of the Länder, the German states, they do participate in the government. He cannot be ousted.
If you had been invited, I wish you had. If you had been invited to number 10 Downing Street on Monday to participate in the 4-way conversation between Volodymyr Zelensky, Chancellor Merz, Prime Minister Starmer, and President Macron, what would you have told them? What would you advise? How would you have advised them? Because I don't know what they could possibly have told Zelensky. They can't raise taxes. They can't borrow money. They can't steal the money in the Belgian banks. What are they going to do for him?
Well, this coalition of the losers is
Right.
Able to cause trouble. And we saw the kind of trouble they can raise today. When Zelensky put out his bid, I can hold elections in 30, 60, 90 days if the British and the Americans, if NATO comes in and gives me security. So if you give me security and secure the elections, then we can have them. Well, this is sneaking in exactly what has been outrightly rejected, inserting Western armed forces into Ukrainian territory. So that didn't just come from the sky. That must have been what they cooked up together in Downing Street on Monday.
Wow. If we define realism by its generally accepted definition of a genuine recognition of the sovereignty and security needs of other countries, is Donald Trump, because the neocons don't accept this, is Donald Trump becoming a realist?
Well, he became a realist. I argue that he became a realist before the elections in 2016, when he consulted. Well, he must have had a sympathy for.
Just change my verb tense. Is Donald Trump a realist?
He is a model, but no, actually, he himself has been very careful in the NSS, this new national security strategy paper, to distance himself from the word realist, in the sense that he is arguing against any ideology. He says, and it's the top of his NSS paper, realism, not realist. And that's an important distinction that we have to introduce here. He is not a hardline realist as Henry Kissinger was in 1994 and stopped being in 2015. That is to say, he recognizes national values or in values-driven thinking, but he doesn't accept them as directing foreign policy, which instead is dominated by national interests. So, yeah, that is where he stands, and of course there are always exceptions. People are not perfectly consistent, and anyone watching the show will say he accepts or he declares the fundamental rule of realism, which is non-interference in the affairs of other countries. And then he goes on to interfere in other countries.
Right.
As he
Right. He bombed the Houthis in Yemen. He paid for the slaughter of the Palestinians in Gaza. And just yesterday, he said the president of Venezuela's days are numbered. According to Colonel Larry Wilkerson, the government is spending $1 billion with a B dollars a day to maintain 20,000 troops and more than a dozen ships at sea off the coast of Venezuela. And yesterday they had war games, or they practiced these, I don't know if war games is the right term, amphibious landings in Puerto Rico. So something's up. I mean, I don't know if the government would waste $1 billion a day and not use it for its ostensible purpose. This is hardly realism. In fact, it is not realism at all.
Well, there's a hierarchy of priorities, and at the highest level of priorities, Trump is being a realist in the full sense of the capital R. The highest of his priorities is establishing a normalization of relations with Russia, and that is a first step to a revised governance of the world, which would look in perfectly Kissinger terms as a power sharing between Russia, China, and the United States, with designated areas of interest for each of them. That's where he's headed on the big scale. That is perfect realist. When you come to the lower priorities, then of course you have the contradictions that you just called out.
I want to go back to Rubio for a minute because Chris has just given me a piece in Politico. This is a year ago. This is January 2025. And I start by saying that I know the Secretary of State and interviewed him many times when I was at Fox and he was a senator. So this is at the time his nomination was made. This is in Politico. Rubio will be fairly, and this is before Witkoff and Kushner were on the scene. Rubio will be fairly hamstrung and will feel sidelined and frustrated, one foreign diplomat told Politico. If he is surly or complains, the humiliation will escalate and then he'll be fired. If he sucks it up, takes the humiliation and smiles through gritted teeth, he will survive until someone else whispers into Trump's ear and angles for the job. The headline of the article is, again, it's before he was even sworn in, Marco Rubio isn't likely to last long as Secretary of State. I would say so far, I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, he's sucking it up, taking the humiliation and smiling through gritted teeth. I mean, for all we know, he calls Lavrov on the phone and they speak.
He has some comfort, and comfort with the people who put him into the Senate. My point is that his game is this whole Caribbean operation you're talking about. After all, his primary interest and his primary expertise, if you want to say he has a professional expertise, it's in these matters, speaking out as the Cuban refugees do. And in that regard, he can go back to his original electors in Florida and say, look, I did a pretty good job for you. Look what I'm doing for regime change in Venezuela.
Right.
So it's not as though he has no comfort zone here. He does have something to play with.
Very, very interesting observation. I want to go back before we end to Venezuela. Is the CIA, which has an enormous investment, both in money, in assets, and in human assets in Ukraine, likely to be working to undermine a peace plan? I mean, the CIA has built 20 stations in Ukraine, which would be gone if the land is ceded to Russia.
Well, I think I better defer to my colleagues with former CIA experience on a question like that, because I don't have an inside view of how the CIA functions or how respectful it is of orders from above coming from the presidency. But yes, of course, as you say, they will have an enormous loss when the Ukraine war is over, under the terms that are likely to be completed with Trump's participation, which is essentially a capitulation and a loss of face for all of the neocons who got us into the war.
Do you have a level of comfort in commenting similarly on MI6?
No, I don't, except that MI6 has been, judging by what they do well, they do very well false flag operations and provocations. That's their specialty at a world-class level. No, you have to take your hat off and say, if you want to do dirty tricks, go to the MI6 because they have a wonderful curriculum vitae. But that is not an inside understanding. That is looking at the outside of what is happening and who would have the expertise to do it, which is almost always MI6.
How about Mossad? Are they in Venezuela? Are they in Ukraine?
I'm not aware of it. But again, this is outside my area of competence.
Okay, good. Much appreciated. Well, thank you. Thank you for your analysis on the national security strategy. We'll see where all this goes. I mean, by the time we speak next week, the United States could have invaded Venezuela, or maybe the situation will remain the same. Christmas is coming up. It's a largely Catholic country, and maybe the president doesn't want to do anything at Christmas time. Who knows? But thank you for your time, my dear friend. We'll look forward to seeing you next week. All the best.
Okay. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. And coming up later today at 1 o'clock this afternoon, Professor Glenn Deason. At 2 o'clock this afternoon, Max Blumenthal, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.